Let's now create a server-side routing capabilities for our contest. So when I refresh this page, I want the server to render the content for a single contest as well. Now, right now we don't have this route because in our Express, we're only handling the slash case. We're not handling the slash contest case. In Express, we can pass multiple routes. So we want to handle the slash, and we also want to handle the case where we do slash contest slash a dynamic value here, and we'll call it contest ID. So this way, our application is going to handle both of them. And in fact, if we refresh right now, it will just render the list of contests. So the route is being handled, but we need to have a logic on the server that says, well, if I'm requesting a slash contest slash one, then you should render a different application state. So with this rendering here, I have request.params.contestID, and let me actually just console log this. So this way, when I refresh this page, in the console log, we'll see the contest ID. But when I refresh the main page, in the console log, we'll see undefined. So this contest ID value can actually be our conditional logic. If I do have a contest ID, then I am navigating to a single contest page. If I don't, then I am on the home page. I can also read the route itself, but for simplicity, I'm just going to use the contest ID. So I'll pass this contest ID as an argument to server render, so that I get to do different things in server render. So in server render, this is going to receive a contest ID. And based on the contest ID, my API URL is going to be different. And also, the initial data is going to be different. So I'm going to create two functions here. First function is to get the API URL based on the contest ID. So this receives a contest ID, and it will return something. And the second function is to read the initial data that I want based on what I'm requesting. This is also going to receive the contest ID, and it will return something. So the API is simple. We basically want to return the current URL. That's the default case. So let me return this guy. But if I do have a contest ID, then my API is going to be a little bit different because it will return this guy and appending the current contest ID that I want, which is contest ID. So this way, the get API URL can be used for both cases. So I'm just going to use it here. Get API URL, and it expects the contest ID coming from the URL. Now, the get initial data is a little bit different. The get initial data is actually going to need the response data. So I'm going to make it into a second argument here, call this API data. And we're going to go ahead and retrieve it here. So in here, we're going to do initial data equal get initial data. And I'll pass the contest ID and the response data. So response.data. And I'll use it here instead of response.data. So initial data and here as well. So the default case is to return the list of contests. And this would be coming from the API data itself, dot contests. That's what we had before. However, if I do have a contest ID, then my data is going to be slightly different. I need to return an object that has the current contest ID. And this is coming from API data.id, because in this case, the API data is going to be a single object that represents a single contest. But this is not going to be enough to render an actual contest. I also need to render the list of contests here because my React application actually computes the current contest from the current contest ID. So if you remember here, the one that we just did, current contest. So I have to have the object structure for contests to be able to look up the current contest. However, in here, when I read this API, the API data is going to represent a single contest. So I don't have a list of contests to work with, but I can fake it. I can return an object here with just one contest that represents the current contest. So basically, I want the ID here to be API data.id and the value to be the API data itself because it represents a single contest. And this is an equal sign, not an arrow. And looks like this is good to go. So one more time, we are passing the contest ID here, and then we're reading two things. We're reading the API URL based on this contest ID, and we're reading the initial data based on this contest ID. The API URL is going to be either /API/contests/the contest ID that we just passed, or in general for a list of contests, we're reading this API endpoint. The initial data is going to be either the default, just the object of contests, or it's going to be a current contest ID that also lists an object of contest that only has one contest. So I think we're ready to test. So if we refresh here, we are getting the list of contests. We go to one contest, we are getting one contest. And if we refresh that, it will also give us one contest from the server. So basically I can curl and go to /contest/4, and this will give me the HTML directly for that contest, and it will expose the data for my React application to pick up the same markup and sync correctly with the server rendered information. So this will actually work without JavaScript as well.